The combination of heightened geopolitical tension, several high-profile ransomware attacks, and the number of people working from home over the last couple of years has really thrust cybersecurity into the spotlight. Have we actually seen a significant uptick in cybercrime?
Hi, Julianna. Yeah, thanks for having me. I mean, the number of attacks that we are seeing over the last year has absolutely increased, like talking specifically in Darktrace terms and what we've seen within a business. Let's take the current issues around Russia and Ukraine. During that period, in the week of that attack, we saw a 90% increase in high priority incidents across energy companies in Europe during that first week of the invasion. But one of the things I will comment on there is that it was a little bit surprising for us in the cybersecurity industry that we didn't see more around these geopolitical tensions. And I suspect it's a little bit more of the slow puncture than perhaps the big blowouts that we were expecting. And while cyber attacks were used to support the physical invasion, it was very much about this constant slow ebb and flow, trying to keep the country disrupted and disconnected. But what we did see was a large increase in the amount of cyber vigilantism. So this is where you'd see organizations that had people working within those businesses that were perhaps sympathetic to the cause of either Ukraine or Russia, that were using their own business assets to be part of a coordinated effort against sort of national assets. So that was something that was quite interesting that we saw around that. But the reality is, conflicts such as Russia and Ukraine is going to be a real sandbox for understanding the future of cyber warfare. And as again, speculation that we might see the consequences of things such as sanctions and the financial sanctions. Russia may well retaliate still through cyber offensive capabilities.
When we talk about cyber crime, you mentioned Russia and Ukraine and the bad actors that have been at play there. But generally speaking, who are the worst bad guys that organizations need to look out for? Is it individual hackers, or does it tend to be big state-sponsored cyber espionage groups?
I think it's dangerous to try and think about who the worst is, because the reality is the worst one is the one that is able to get a foothold into the organization and cause damage. And it's not necessarily easy to predict where that's going to come from, in what direction, or what level of capability that we see. One of the things that I'm conscious of, though, is that around times of geopolitical tension is often when you see the attackers investing a lot in sort of cyber offensive capabilities. And at the moment, you see that in terms of sort of nation states investing a lot in terms of their cyber offensive. But that's not necessarily something that day-to-day organizations that are industries outside of the ones that they're targeting need to necessarily be concerned about. However, once that capability has been created, that cat is out of the bag. There's no delete on that cyber offensive tools. And it's only a matter of time before that capability cascades down into the hands of the criminal attackers that are operating on the other side of the dark web, that are able to commoditize these tools and capabilities at scale. And this is where you start to see things like the Colonial Pipeline attack that we saw of last year, where people were having to queue at gas stations to get to their petrol as a consequence of a cyber attack that happened in the ethereal world of ones and zeros. People were having to have their days interrupted as a consequence of the cyber attack. And that is because of these commodity criminals that are able to proliferate their attacks at scale.
Which sectors are most vulnerable at this point to cybercrime?
I think right now we have a particular concern around critical national infrastructure. So things that are energy supplies, utilities, and things like that, because that is essential for society to be able to continue to tick. And if you are trying to enact a sort of geopolitical motivation, you want to have the biggest impact that you can. You want to be doing something that is causing a kinetic impact, and they're a good area for people to be able to do that. I'm also particularly concerned about the financial services sector as I think about, any potential retaliation in terms of sanctions. But let's not forget as well that, the current geopolitical tensions aren't the only factor that is driving an increase in the number of cyber attacks. And, whilst in the moment it's a very sort of topical area, it wasn't long, it was only December that we were talking about the Log4j vulnerability and the fact that, the digital foundations our internet and many of our businesses sit upon, there are potential sort of cracks in there that could be exploited. And again, that was a very, very significant high-profile attack. I talked about the ransomware attacks of last year and Colonial Pipeline. The reality is there a constant narrative, there's a constant shift in terms of the cyber attacks that we should be concerned about and the direction that they could potentially be coming in. But the reality is this is just a part of a very, very consistent theme that the cyber landscape is evolving, but it is also innovating, and trying to stay ahead of an attack is something that businesses are going to need to be able to do increasingly.
When it comes to staying ahead of potential cyber attacks in the private sector, whose responsibility is it to protect these businesses and protect customers and clients that use these businesses from bad actors? Is this the role of the government, or does the onus of responsibility fall on the businesses themselves?
It's a really interesting challenge. And because attribution is so hard, it's very easy to disguise your activities and make it appear that it's coming from somewhere else. It means that creating that accountability can be quite difficult as well. But in my mind, I feel like there's three sort of major stakeholders that have a role to play in thinking about how we protect the digital businesses of the future. And when it comes to, and those three are government, I think business, and us as participants in society. And I think taking each of those individually, things like government, I think, the recent geopolitical tensions have shown us that teamwork is back in fashion. And I think collaborating across governments, across sort of national intelligence agencies to make sure that we're sharing information quickly, because time is very much of the essence in terms of this intelligence, that'd be wonderful. And I think a greater digital collaboration, a sort of tech NATO, was something that would really help with that. When it comes to business, no business is an island, and the chain is only as strong as its weakest link. And we do need, I think, greater accountabilities on business to make sure that they are doing the essentials in a world where, all modern businesses overlap with each other. And then lastly, also society. We as participants in society should lower our tolerance for cyber breaches and data loss. And I think, we're all common of it. We all suffer it. We see a headline about a big data breach and we shrug our shoulders and think, oh, well, what can be done about it? But the reality is more can be done, and we need to be less tolerant of these high profile breaches.
Absolutely. That certainly rings true in terms of the public reaction generally to news of these types of breaches. For those decision makers and business leaders watching this conversation, what are the biggest choke points for organizations? And for those who are in charge of spending on cyber protection, where should they focus their efforts?
I think one of the challenges that businesses are facing throughout is skills. And I think you've addressed this as part of your conference as well earlier on. There's just not enough human skills out there to deal with the scale of the cyber challenge. And I would really sort of encourage businesses to think about how they're going to get the best out of those people. And the really sort of forward-looking companies that we're working with and thinking about how do we empower the people within their system to do that really good high-level strategic thinking about what that business should look like in the 12 to 24 months, and let the technology do that sort of day-to-day firefighting, because there are just simply not enough people out there to be able to deal with the scale of the challenge. And the second thing that I will say is that there tends... Yeah, well, I'm more than happy with that. But the second thing I would say as well is thinking about how you move from a very reactive posture into a proactive one. I think businesses now understand that they need to use technology to be able to stop a cyber attack. But what about all the time that you're not under active attack? How do you harden your defensive in a way that's personalized to you and sort of give you the chance to sort of think, if I was on the attacker's side of the table, how would my business look to them? Where would they see those vulnerabilities? And what can we as a business start doing today to make that look less and less appealing to the eyes of through the eyes of an attacker?
Well, Poppy, to pick up on your point about using technology to protect against cybercrime, Darktrace uses AI to detect attacks and vulnerabilities inside IT networks. It's your unique selling point and your real proposition for your clients. Why is AI so useful in building the cyber workforce?
AI is, let's not forget that AI at its core principles is mathematics. And it's mathematics that's able to ingest vast amounts of data across a whole myriad of types of digital business. It could be like your email environment, your cloud. Think how complicated modern businesses are with their SaaS applications. And only by leveraging AI are you able to consume all of this intelligence and understanding and process it in a way that is intelligent and relevant to your business. That means that technology is able to make intelligent decisions that are unique to the challenges that your business is facing, but do it so not within minutes and seconds, but within seconds and fractions of a second. Because when you're dealing with a challenge such as cyber, it's a challenge that operates at pace, and you need that pace when you're on the defensive side as well.
I imagine that the bad actors are also using AI more and more. Poppy, when it comes to the government side of things and the role that governments can play in providing protection as we move forward, I understand you have called in the past for a tech NATO. How would that work?
I think, and just to touch on this a little bit, there is so much that can be done to support organizations in preventing those attacks before they occur by understanding what other businesses and other industries are seeing. And we talked about the idea that, the cyber attackers aren't constrained to operating within a single geography. So you will see an attack that perhaps emerges in one nation that moves through into other territories and other geographies very quickly. And many, the UK, the US, all across Europe, have incredible intelligence about what they are seeing and the kind of organizations that are under attack. And by having a formal collaboration that enables them to share that intelligence could absolutely support other organizations, other businesses in other territories that ultimately will secure the entirety of the supply chain. The other point as well, I would love to say as well that, organizations, intelligence services, particularly in the UK, you have things like the National Cybersecurity Centre that does a brilliant job of protecting many of the businesses that operate within the territory. And they will be saying to organizations, you know what, we have identified that this attacker is within your organization. You should probably be doing something about that. I would love to see much greater accountability in ensuring that organization does do something about that they don't just continue to operate in the knowledge that there is an attacker within their business, that they are actively taking the responsible steps to do something about it. Because in all reality, that business will be interacting with many other businesses daily, as all of our businesses do. And we should all have an accountability as business leaders to make sure we're doing our utmost to protect all of those organizations that we deal with on a day-to-day basis.
So collaboration and accountability key. Poppy, when you look across the different types of attacks that are out there, the types of threats that are out there, what kind of attacks do you worry most about?
I'm particularly interested in the artificial intelligence being used on the side of the attacker. And we're already seeing the signs of technology being leveraged to be able to issue attacks at scale. You see this in terms of where there could be an attack against a particular sort of email box, and they will work down the directory in alphabetical order. That's clearly sort of technology operating on the other side of that. That's very quickly doing a spear phishing campaign or something, just operating down there. These are emails that are being issued at scale. All of these attacks are trying to elicit a response from a person within that organization that they wouldn't otherwise do. It might be to click on a link or to visit a site or open an attachment or do something that wouldn't have done otherwise. And to be able to create a sort of compelling environment is really essential to that. So you get very sophisticated attacks that are mimicking the way that human expects. It would mimic the type of correspondence that is typical that person would receive. And artificial intelligence would be really good at generating that in a convincing way. I keep thinking about the fact that, many organizations are talking virtually over, technologies such as we are today. And we've already seen it's possible to create deep fakes of people that appear to be something that they're not. And the idea that you could almost do a spear phishing campaign over a virtual technology communication system where you're actually seeing a computer generated artifice of someone that you're expecting, that would become a very compelling way to get the human on the other end to do something they wouldn't otherwise do. So I do worry that the technology is only going to get better. It's only going to get more convincing. But I'm also confident that the technology on the defensive side is absolutely absolutely 100% guaranteed to be ahead of what we're seeing in the attack. And it is possible to use technology to defend yourself from these very sophisticated attacks.
Well, that is a very encouraging note to end that thought on. Poppy, let me just wrap up, bringing it back to where you started the conversation, and that is with Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the cyber warfare that many have feared. Is it clear how to define an act of war in the cyber world?
It's not, and it's really interesting because where does the boundary step? Like, where does it become from a frustrating inconvenience to something that is an act of war? And there is a whole spectrum of grey that operates within the middle of that. But to be able to define those boundaries would become very challenging, because it does require collaboration across all of those nations to understand where those rules of engagement exist. And collaboration of that nature requires not months, not even years, but most likely decades to establish something like this. This is something that evolves very, very slowly and by using a lot of sort of government and sort of political power. But the reality is those attacks are moving far, far faster than that. And I'm not confident that the rules of engagement can be defined faster than the scale of the sort of cyber attacks that we are seeing.